The room was tense, almost painfully silent. A martial arts student of Mike Tyson, confident and brimming with expectation, stepped forward to challenge Bruce Lee. The witnesses watched, certain they would see a drawn-out confrontation, perhaps even a spectacle of skill. But in less than 10 seconds, the challenge ended. Not with a show of force, nor a drawn-out struggle. Just silence. A quiet, inescapable finality that left everyone present staring, uncomprehending, at what had just unfolded. No one moved. No one spoke. The room had shifted, irreversibly, in the space of a heartbeat. The gym was quiet, though not empty. Light filtered through narrow windows, falling in thin rectangles across the polished wooden floor. On one side, a row of observers, friends, students, and a few notable figures in the martial arts community, stood or leaned against walls, their expressions measured. There was no cheering, no casual chatter. Only the soft scrape of shoes on wood and the occasional shifting of weight. At the center of the room, the space was deliberately left clear. Mats lined the floor, though they were little more than a boundary, a subtle marker of where something might or might not happen. Bruce Lee stood near one edge, calm, his posture relaxed yet alert. He did not glance at the audience. He did not raise his hands. He simply observed. Across from him, the challenger, a student trained under Mike Tyson's tutelage, entered the space. He carried the weight of expectation. His own skill, his instructor's reputation, the implicit pressure of the witness's anticipation. His eyes scanned Bruce Lee carefully, calculating, measuring the distance, the stance, the slightest shift in posture. There was pride in his step, a confidence born of rigorous training, yet beneath it lingered a trace of uncertainty. The room seemed to shrink around them. Observers, though trying to appear composed, leaned forward slightly, their attention taut. A single breath might have broken the tension, but none did. Time stretched, each moment amplified by the expectation of a confrontation that everyone assumed would be drawn out, elaborate, and decisive in motion. And yet, despite the challenger's preparation and the collective anticipation of the audience, there was an unspoken understanding. Bruce Lee did not move until the moment demanded it. Every subtle shift, every blink was measured. The space between the two men became charged, not with aggression, but with silent possibility. In that quiet, the room itself seemed to anticipate what was coming, holding its breath for a truth that only action, not words, could reveal. The challenger's eyes, trained to read opponents, swept over Bruce Lee. He noted the relaxed shoulders, the even breathing, the way Lee's feet were planted lightly yet solidly on the floor. There was no flourish, no display meant to intimidate, only precision. The student expected to find openings, to detect hesitation, to gauge weakness. But there was nothing to exploit, nothing offered. Every detail, from the tilt of Lee's head to the slight lift of his chest, spoke of control. Bruce Lee, in contrast, seemed almost absent of pretense. He did not acknowledge the challenger beyond the barest recognition of movement. There was no tension in his arms, no rigid stance. His focus was singular, centered entirely on the other man, not with aggression but with observation. Every twitch, every micro-adjustment in posture, was catalogued and understood before it had fully formed. The observers, too, felt the difference. They had seen fighters step into a ring, attempting to dominate through presence or intimidation. This was not one of those moments. There was no posturing, no effort to draw attention. And yet, the authority Lee projected was unmistakable. It was not loud or showy. It was quiet, inevitable, and inescapable. The challenger made the first movement, a subtle step forward, an attempt to assert presence. He expected Bruce Lee to react in kind, to parry or to shift. But Lee remained, barely shifting weight, a calm anchor amidst the challenger's tentative motion. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause, a suspension in the air, where the audience collectively registered something extraordinary. The challenger was no longer in control of the space. In that moment, authority was established, not by force, but by observation, by understanding the opponent's intent before it fully materialized. The challenger had trained under one of the most formidable boxers of the era, confident in technique and physicality. Yet, in the quiet, deliberate assessment of Bruce Lee, the familiar metrics of skill and power became irrelevant. Mastery, the witnesses realized, was not demonstrated through effort. It existed quietly in the absence of error, in the inevitability of outcome. The room remained silent, but the dynamic had shifted. The challenger, aware, if only subconsciously, that he faced more than a body or a technique, paused. Bruce Lee did not advance, did not retreat. He simply was. And in that simple being, the balance of authority had already tilted. The room's quiet was no longer merely the absence of sound. It had become a presence itself, pressing against every observer, amplifying the smallest movement. Eyes followed the challenger's subtle shifts, the way he tested his footing, the slight tightening of his jaw. Every micro-expression was noted, catalogued, and felt by those around him. The spectators were no longer passive. They had become participants in a slow, invisible drama. Whispers, almost imperceptible, flowed through the group. Not questions, but speculations. How would this end? Would Bruce Lee respond? Could a student of Mike Tyson stand against such mastery? Each thought collided with another in hushed, unspoken debate. The anticipation was not loud. It was concentrated, a tight coil of expectation that made the next moment unavoidable. The challenger's movements, once confident, began to carry the faintest edge of hesitation. Small signs, an arm held too stiffly, a weight shifted too late, revealed cracks imperceptible to most, but glaring to Lee. Observers felt the shift even before the challenger did. The weight of mastery was no longer theoretical. It had begun to manifest, subtly, in every measured pause, in every decision deferred. Time itself seemed to distort. A second stretched into several as the audience, conditioned to anticipate action, realized that mastery did not need display. Bruce Lee's silence had become a force, defining the space and the pace. The challenger moved again, attempting to reclaim composure, but each step now felt heavier, calculated against an authority that required no response, no aggression, no motion beyond observation. In that quiet crucible, psychological tension peaked. The observer's eyes darted from Lee to the challenger, from challenge to consequence, understanding that the outcome was already inscribed in the space between them. The room had become a mirror of the human mind under pressure, expectation, doubt, recognition. The narrative had advanced without a single decisive strike, yet the inevitability of what was to come was palpable. And in that stillness, before the demonstration even began, the audience realized the fundamental truth. Mastery does not shout. It exists quietly, unseen until it asserts itself in the only way that matters, through resolution. The challenger advanced again, this time more deliberately, as though projecting confidence could regain lost control. His movements were measured, trained, precise, but the space itself no longer obeyed him. Bruce Lee's eyes followed each step, each subtle adjustment, yet his body remained relaxed, anchored, unyielding. And then it happened. In a span of moments so brief most would struggle to recall it fully, the confrontation concluded. There were no flailing strikes, no dramatic parries, no showy maneuvers. Just a movement small, exact, and purposeful, delivered with an efficiency that made resistance irrelevant. The challenger, for all his preparation and skill, was halted, not violently but absolutely. Witnesses described the scene afterward as almost dreamlike. Some could barely articulate what they saw. A hand, a shift in balance, a step that seemed to anticipate the challenger's intentions before he fully committed. The result was immediate, undeniable, and final. The room itself seemed to exhale, the weight of inevitability settling over everyone present. Bruce Lee did not celebrate. He did not raise his hands. He did not speak. He simply returned to his stance, calm, observing, as though the event had been expected all along. The challenger, meanwhile, stood frozen, a mixture of disbelief and recognition in his eyes. No one needed to declare a winner, the outcome was self-evident. Authority, quiet and absolute, had spoken. The observers, many of whom had trained alongside the challenger, felt the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Not through spectacle, not through noise, but through a lesson in precision, control, and the subtle application of skill. The event lasted less than 10 seconds, yet it resonated far beyond the moment. The impact etched into the minds of those present. Silence returned, heavier now, layered with comprehension. The challenger retreated, not out of embarrassment, but in acknowledgement. The room had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. What had been assumed impossible, a brief confrontation ending decisively without display, had occurred. And in that quiet demonstration, the principles of mastery were revealed. Efficiency, restraint, and the psychological authority that can render challenge moot before a strike is even made. The challenger stood frozen, not from physical restraint but from recognition. The mind, trained in hours of rigorous boxing and martial arts drills, struggled to reconcile expectation with reality. Every assumption he had brought into the gym, the confidence of training, the pride of lineage, the certainty of preparation, had been quietly dismantled in an instant. Around him, observers shifted uneasily. Some whispered in disbelief, though the words were soft, almost apologetic. Others remained silent, staring, as if their eyes alone could process the subtle mastery they had just witnessed. The energy of the room had changed. Tension had been replaced with reflection, and anticipation with awe. No one clapped. No one cheered. There was only a collective understanding that something definitive had occurred, beyond performance or display. The challenger's breathing, once controlled and deliberate, now carried the weight of comprehension. A subtle slump of the shoulders, the hesitation in his gaze, revealed the internal reckoning taking place. He had not been bested by aggression, by brute strength, or by overwhelming force. He had been met by something quieter but infinitely more potent, the inevitability of mastery. Bruce Lee remained still, his posture unchanged, but the effect of his presence radiated outward. The room had become a mirror, reflecting the fragile illusions of control and dominance the challenger had carried in. Authority, when absolute, does not demand recognition. It commands it simply by existing, and the challenger had felt that force without a single word or overt act. Observers would later recount that the psychological shift was the most profound part of the encounter. They had come expecting action, perhaps a contest. What they received was understanding. The challenger's collapse was not public humiliation. It was a quiet internal surrender to reality, a reckoning with skill, with efficiency, and with the truth that mastery can render challenge irrelevant before it even begins. In the silence that followed, the lesson lingered, heavy yet unobtrusive. The room's atmosphere remained charged, not with tension, but with comprehension. Witnesses recognized that this was not merely a moment of victory. It was a demonstration of principle, the supremacy of quiet authority over confidence, of observation over assumption, and of inevitability over effort. Years later, the story of that brief confrontation circulated quietly through martial arts circles. Those who had witnessed it retold the events with precision, avoiding embellishment, careful to preserve the subtlety of what had transpired. It was not the speed, the strike, or the physical dominance that lingered in memory. It was the silence, the inevitability, and the quiet authority that had defined the room in those 10 seconds. The challenger went on with his training, yet the incident never left him. Colleagues and peers noticed the change. A tempered confidence, a recognition that skill could exist beyond display, that authority could manifest without declaration. The lesson had been absorbed in the body as much as in the mind, a quiet recalibration of understanding, internalized rather than broadcast. Bruce Lee's presence, already formidable, acquired another layer of legend. Stories of the encounter traveled through gyms, studios, and dojos, each retelling cautious to preserve the integrity of the moment. It became a reference point, not for bravado or spectacle, but for what mastery truly required: calm observation, efficiency of action, and the psychological clarity to render challenge irrelevant before it begins. Observers reflected that the impact of the moment endured precisely because it was understated. There were no dramatics, no exaggerated displays of strength, no triumph shouted aloud. Instead, there was a quiet, undeniable fact. The confrontation had ended, swiftly and decisively, with lessons felt more than spoken. Over time, the story became emblematic, not of victory, but of principle, the way true mastery influences, teaches, and endures far beyond the arena of its demonstration. In the retelling, the silence remained central. Even decades later, when recounting the event, witnesses would pause, letting the weight of that stillness settle over their words. The incident was not just remembered. It was lived, an enduring testament to restraint, observation, and the subtle authority that defines a master. The legend persisted because of what was not done as much as what was. No spectacle, no excessive motion, no drama. Only mastery, quiet, absolute, and remembered long after the room had emptied and the challenge was gone. In that quiet, Bruce Lee's influence endured, shaping understanding, expectation, and respect in ways that could never be measured by seconds alone.